Okay, so the first thing we're going to look for when we are deciding about a news source is headline and placement. So we're looking at what are the big news stories on this site on a particular day. What kind of placement do they get? Are they at the top of the page? Are they the first thing you're going to see? Back in the olden times when we looked at newspapers, there was everything above the fold that you would see on the front of the newsstand was always the lead article. So let's look at CNN as an example. And today our articles include a great big headline that says Trump's behavior alarms public health experts. And if we continue to scroll down, we see a short video. It's not a picture, but it's a video of the president. And instead of putting his mask on, which I'm sure he must have done at some point today, he is shown taking his mask off. If you look further, we can see that Fed chair warns of economic tragedy if America can't control the virus. A still infectious president ignored advisors to return to the White House. He later falsely tweeted that COVID-19 is less deadly than the seasonal flu. Georgetown created fact sheet on what to do if you spot illegal militias at polls. So clearly, these are the focuses of CNN's coverage today. Now, to compare, let's look at Fox News. All right, so our main subject here again is the president. So we know that in both cases, this was an important news story for today. In this case, we have the president giving the thumbs up signal. We don't have the mask being taken off like we did over at CNN, but we do have him represented with flags on both sides, probably in front of the White House. We have a headline that reads, White House says Trump is, quote, projecting strength as he battles coronavirus, defends taking off mask. They are referencing the mask, but they're not showing him taking it off as CNN just did. Now, if we continue down, you can see that there are other headlines that Fox News is paying attention to today. We have both clips over here. We have a news commentator slams over the top media reaction to Trump removing his mask, which may refer back to that CNN article. Trump's doctors say the president reports no symptoms of coronavirus hours after return to the White House. All sorts of different, most of the topics here actually relate to President Trump and the coronavirus. So that tells us that there's some similarities, but maybe the way that they're covering and the placement of these news stories might be a little bit different. Okay, definitely pay attention to the pictures, which we'll talk about later. Let's look at NPR just as a third counterpoint. Now again, we're looking at the headlines and we're looking at what's being represented here, where our placement is. And again, here we have our news coverage of Donald Trump again. Slightly different picture than we saw at Fox News, but again, removing the mask rather than actually putting the mask on? Question mark? That's a great question because we don't know in this picture if he is in the act of removing or if he's in the act of putting on. So that's something to consider. This might be a more neutral photograph of what actually happened depending on our understanding of the events. We have a headline that says still undergoing COVID-19 treatment. Trump claims he'll be ready to debate next week. So again, covering the president, covering what's happening, but perhaps a different perspective. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see that we have election coverage that relates to Joe Biden. We hadn't heard about coverage of either of the Biden campaign on either of the other sites from those first few articles. And we have some other articles that don't relate to the president, so a different vantage point than what we saw on CNN and Fox News. All right, so remember that as you begin to unpack these news sites, we want you to look for 3 major headlines that are covered by your organization. So we just modeled that for you. And what you notice about these headlines, this is where you're going to weigh in as someone who's going to be the news consumer. What do these headlines tell you about what's happening in our country? Do they all focus around the same event? Are they all about the same person? If there are differences, acknowledge those. And what does the placement on the homepage tell you about how the story is covered? And in each of those 3 cases, the 3 sites we looked at, you get a different story that first-time viewer is coming to, and how are they going to interpret the news of the day based on those differences. Finally, we're going to ask for you to analyze this. So based on what you've noticed so far, is the coverage provided balanced or unbiased. And remember, you're going to be looking at one of these websites in particular. So we want you to look at yours objectively and decide if this is a biased coverage or if this is a neutral coverage, and explain to us why you think so based on what you've looked at so far. Good luck, and I can't wait to see what you unpack.